Something I thought would be really interesting, and kind of a spoiler alert for Peacemaker Season 2, especially the finale. James Gunn has did this whole thing in Peacemaker that kind of is inspired by the DC run Salvation Run. Salvation Run is very interesting, but of course he kind of talks about certain things that there's only utilizing the concept of the story and not actually taking a lot of things from it, just kind of that one little premise. With that finale, take some things with James Gunn as a grain of salt. Basically, Salvation Run is where the villains, and what they're going with metahumans here, are just no resources. They're just thrown in there, as we've seen, like, Peacemaker, thrown in there, nothing there to survive. They're just in there, and that's the prison. They're not on this world. There's no bad things. Or perhaps there is, but they're just sent there to pretty much die or survive. It's a pretty scary-ass concept the more you think about it. Salvation Run was first put out in 2007 and it lasted until 2008 and was a 7-issue limited series. It was designed to tie into the countdown to Final Crisis, which is a huge DC thing. In this one, Amanda Waller and the Suicide Squad do exactly what Rick Flag did, where they made a separate world for these metahumans or villains. It is interesting because it does highlight a lot of the DC villains, because especially James Gunn talks about there is this whole arc between Lex Luthor and the Joker in it that they're not going to adapt, which could be very upsetting. But I understand this early in the game, maybe they shouldn't be doing a Joker versus Lex Luthor thing. Maybe later on, I don't know, because of course we haven't really seen Joker yet. We've seen Lex Luthor because he's going to be main I guess protagonist with Superman in Man of Tomorrow. Pretty much all these villains are there. One of the first groups in there: Captain Cold, Heatwave, Mirror Master, Weathered Wizard. There's a lot of a lot of characters that get in there that are villains. They learn that the planet that they're on is hostile, and we've kind of see already with Peacemaker being there, he hears these creepy ass roars, and he's very uneasy there, kind of like how they do. And of course, other things, beasts and mechanical beasts. Of course, later on in there, different villains are thrown in there. A lot of Batman villains, for example, Joker, Clayface, Killer Croc, Mr. Freeze, but of course, Cheetah, Vandal, Savage. There's a few, but it is interesting that Clayface is mentioned a few times in this comic book, because Clayface is set to be in the DCU, so I wonder if they're going to kind of do that connective tissue between the two. Lex Luthor, of course, is in there, which is going to be interesting to see Lex Luthor almost be against this, because he's, again, kind of teaming up with Superman in some way in Man of Tomorrow. But it is kind of like a reverse Civil War kind of thing, a reverse team up where there's Team Joker and there's Team Lex Luthor. One interesting thing that I wanted to talk about is Martian Manhunter is there, kind of disguising himself as one of the villains to report back to Batman, which is quite interesting. One of Darkseid's men orchestrate a lot of things for a greater purpose at this point. Pretty much becomes a camping ground for Darkseid to kind of raise his army up. But Parademon does attack eventually in that run, revealing that this was not meant to be a safe haven. It's not meant to be anything. It's meant to pretty much kill these characters. Of course, there are a few major things. The villains always will be fighting against themselves constantly, because there are villains, different alliances are shifting, different betrayals happen. Pretty much like, there's something called the Society Plan, where Joker is very instrumental in that, killing a few of them. Hellhound is injured and later is fed to creatures kind of like the non-lizards by other villains, and it's a really, really scary concept to talk about. Lex Luthor, being on the other hand, does make a device to get them back to Earth, but again, he's on the other side. Of course, with that portal, it does, as you would think, goes a little crazy and explodes, killing a lot of the villains in a weird way. It does end with a big thing between Lex Luthor and Joker, with pretty much a good amount of villains escaping, coming back to Earth, and being free in Earth in some way. Pretty much these villains are meant to hurt each other, meant to survive in any way they can, because they have no resources, they have nobody backing them up. Almost worse than being in prison, because they are no contact to the people they may love, no contact to the world. They can't continue doing on with this. It is a big thing for the setup of Final Crisis, where the villains kind of team up in a way with the good guys. It's quite interesting how they do this. Pretty much it's exactly what we've seen in the DCU, where the metahumans are, or the villains are sent there, and it's just a lot of alliances. Darkseid kind of emerges in some way, but that's pretty much a big overlay of it. If you want me to explain it more, I could go more into detail with the story. But the characters I mentioned were in this, but there's also different other characters that are in there. There's more between the Joker and Lex Luthor, which is a quite interesting dynamic that we could dive into in another video. It is interesting interesting because like people like the Justice League as well are kind of kept in the dark. Batman is very suspicious, and that's why he has Martian Manhunter working in some way to kind of see what's going on and what they could do to stop it. Of course, Superman and Wonder Woman are left in the dark because they would not be okay with this, especially Superman in that way. The Justice League kind of just, in a way, almost lets it happen for quite a bit of time, and it almost only further pisses off these villains, putting it in the wrong direction for when they come back. Let me know what you think of this down below.